The North Dakota Industrial Commission to order, and I will take the roll.
Governor,
Present.
Attorney General,
Yes.
Commissioner,
Here.
Report.
We have a quorum. Would you lead us in the pledge?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Are you ready?
We are.
We will now call on Don Morgan, the Bank of North Dakota president for presentation.
All right, thank you so much. Thank you, Industrial Commission, for making time for this special meeting. We felt the introduction of the capital policy for the first time for Bank of North Dakota, given the timing of legislative session here, was important to get this before you, as it's becoming a part of our conversation as we move into session here. I am going to go through very quickly kind of the framework, the why of it, the general overlying framework, the thought process behind it, and then Rob will kind of into the numbers. We plan to stay pretty brief, go through it, and we'll have plenty of time for Q&A. So I've been 5 months here at the Bank of North Dakota. We've been spending a lot of time clarifying our mission, and the mission really starts and drives the capital plan, because the mission really starts and drives the entirety of our strategic plan and the running of B&D as an organization. And we get very specific in that mission and stack ranking it. Part of this came about as a result of the cash management, the RBK study, where we wanted to get out and say, first and foremost, we are risk managers at the Bank of North Dakota. That's the top of our mission stacking. Right behind that were liquidity providers to the state. Behind that were economic developers of the state with our various programs and the way we leverage. And then at the end of that, we provide a total risk-based return. It's important to note the 1 through 4 stacking there, because if we put return to number 1, that would make us more of like a venture capital firm or a hedge fund. We're not. We're a bank. Therefore, we're risk managers, liquidity providers, economic developers, and total return providers. That mission then drives the development of our capital plan. It is very important to it. The framework of the capital plan itself starts with the FDIC regulated limits. Now, technically, we are not subject to FDIC or other federal regulations. However, these are best practices in the banking industry. The FDIC is fairly commensurate with, say, like the OCC and other federal regulatory bodies. And the FDIC is well known and well used in the state of North Dakota for community banks. So we start with that as the benchmark as a best practice, because it is a best practice.
Can I interrupt you a second?
Yes.
Are there any notifications that you have to make for something like that if you don't comply? No, I think it's just totally.
We do
up to
not,
you.
given the ownership and the fact that we don't offer FDIC insurance. Yeah, yeah. We fall under Department of Financial Institutions and them alone. Yep.
Okay.
On top of that, we then quantify the risk of the organization via our enterprise risk management system. Now, banks out there have been doing enterprise risk management systems for some time now. The industry really evolved to that, kind of given the 08-09 financial crisis and what has kind of occurred in banking since. We have at Bank of North Dakota have an existing enterprise risk management system. That's very good. We took it to another level and we quantified the risk within that. We weighted it, we bucketed it. You can look in there. The enterprise risk management system of Bank of North Dakota weights up in all the key categories for the organization, like strategic risk, operational risk, IT risk, credit risk, liquidity risk, interest rate risk, things like that. That's the quantified buffer on top of the FDIC regulatory limit. That's that first insertion of the holistic risk of the organization on top of the capital buffer. And that's pretty much all quantified and quantifiable. Then, and this is important in a plan, we bring in the qualitative piece, the subjective piece, the banking expertise piece. And we look and say, what are the unique things about the Bank of North Dakota? And banks that do capital plans like this, they insert a qualitative, subjective piece as well, because with every bank, there is something unique about them. Some of the ones that we stack in that are unique about us is the fact that we cannot go out and raise outside capital. We are pretty captive to the state government and the legislative body. Another one is we have a very captive deposit base. We do not go out and compete for retail deposits. And as indicated by the RBK study, there's one study and one possible vote away from having essentially a quasi deposit run on the organization by deposits being elsewhere, and we have to figure it out. That's a unique risk to us. Some of the disaster programs that we are, per our mission, and for the good of the state, we are there for, that carries additional risk that we want to put in a capital buffer. And there's some more that Rob will go through when we get into the specifics. But we stack that onto the FDIC limit, the enterprise risk management quantified piece. This is our qualitative piece that's unique to us. And then we stress test that. We stress test the heck out of it. We look ahead 3-5 years, various scenarios. What if this happens? What if credit quality goes here? What if there's another major pandemic shutdown? What if our earnings drop? Those types of good multi-dimensional stress tests is what we put on that. And that then is the sum of our capital analysis. It says for this time period, based on these things, quantified risk, qualitative risk, and forward-looking stress test, this is the capital range we should be running at for the foreseeable future. The plan is to bring the capital plan to Industrial Commission annually. We will be looking at this. I mean, we have capital conversations internally monthly. I mean, even weekly, right? We're watching it that close. If there is some material change on a quarterly basis, we would of course bring that to Industrial Commission. But we think starting out with annual reporting is appropriate to the Industrial Commission. And of course, if that changes, we can tweak that moving forward. At the end of the day, what we're trying to answer and look our board of directors, the Industrial Commission, in the eye with is that we have sufficient capital to accomplish our strategies, our growth strategies, our return strategies, our potential fintech strategies, our CapEx strategies. Anything new and emerging we're looking at, the amount of disasters we expect that we're currently going through. We can accomplish our mission through all that environment. We are appropriately managing and mitigating the holistic risk of the organization, not just a piece of it, the entirety and the holistic piece of it, inclusive of that unique organizational risk that we do carry. We also want to provide ownership, and we define ownership in the bank, ownership, quote unquote, as state government, as inclusive of the executive branch, the Industrial Commission, the legislative body. But we also then say and this is set up, the Industrial Commission is essentially the board of directors of the Bank of North Dakota. So we say we want to provide that group a nice risk balanced return on equity. That's also part of the capital plan. And then of course we want to operate in a sustainable and safe, as a sustainable and safe organization. The final idea I'll go over here through the capital plan is we like this because our hope is that it will bring the conversation around capital of the bank and dividends into a proactive framework rather than reactive. We can proactively come to our board of directors and thereby by extension ownership via state government, legislative body with here's the capital we need to run the bank. We didn't pull the number out of the air. It's based on industry best practice. It's based on FDIC. It's based on quantifying risk. It's based on assessing our unique risk. And it's also stress testing based on our environment. So there's sound business practice behind this calculation. It will be dynamic. It will change. And it needs to because our environment that we operate in changes. Our strategies change. So we need this plan to be able to change. And especially when we look forward with term limits and the dynamics of that and the change dynamics of that, we also like this being a proactive conversation coming through our advisory board to Industrial Commission so that we can present this to you for your good decision. I'll turn over to Rob to go through, and I think he's going to go to the page that has the capital stack on it.
Yeah, so there's a couple of things, and this is the capital policy and the bumpers, which we'll discuss, and the stress testing, all hinge, particularly the buffers and the stress testing, hinge off the recommendation from DFI to bring those forward for Industrial Commission review and approval. So as we look at the capital stack, and you'll notice the box on the left-hand side there is when you start out, Don had mentioned, we follow really the best practices. So the starting point is the FDIC, which is 5%. Within the FDIC guidance, then it says, okay, that's the starting point. Additionally, you need to look at your buffers. And they don't tell you exactly what to do, but they say, we expect you to look at economic conditions and your uniqueness and all these things. So we walk down our capital buffers to build up to our capital target ratio. And so you'll see capital adequacy buffer. Now, we're unique in the range of we can't go out and raise capital like
So that's why 12% is 12%.
Well, we're building up to 12%. So we start at 5 and we added $150 million for what we call capital adequacy buffer. There's an additional 1.43 on top of the 5. Okay. So that's the first start. We can't go out and raise capital. So 150 million we added in. On average, the banks we work with are in the $3 to $4 billion range. They have a line of credit about $50 million at the holding company level in case they need to access it for liquidity input or for capital input. So that goes from 5 to 6.43. Then we walk down and we talk about asset growth risk. We put in $50 million, which is about the 5% at $1 billion. We've seen our assets grow overnight by $1 billion, right? Oil prices jump, our assets scream up $1 billion pretty quickly. So we add 50 million or 0.48%. Mission risk, we added 0.5% there, or 52 million. We are not a standard financial institution. We do a number of different programs, whether they're on balance sheet as it relates to under securitized lending, below market lending, the ag program that we're looking at, kind of a little bit lower than market, those types of things. Mission based as what drives us, right? Then we get into governmental risk. And so we added 1.43% on top of our order, 150 million. And this is really driven off the fact that if you just go back to the 15-17 biennium, when we had a budget deficit, they accessed $100 million of additional bank capital to help fill a deficit hole. And so that, based upon where the budget's growing to, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when it'll occur. And us reserving that in our capital stack, we're prepared for at least $150 million. And then we work down into correspondent banking, which is another 0.5%. We're not the lead financial institution. We don't have a direct relationship. There is some inherent risk there. Disaster loan funding, we're all familiar with that. Every other year, we're working, again, mission-based stuff. And so that's $100 million. And then finally, the ERM risk, which is quantifiable, as Don talked about, adds 1.75. So if you take the 5% and you add in the buffers of 7.03, that gets us to the 12% targeted capital ratio of 1.3 billion in capital necessary from that target standpoint. And those buffers play in off of the FDIC's target. If that would pause for any questions. It's a lot of numbers, so I do apologize.
You're not really playing with the 5 to the 12 differential. You're playing with 12 to like 8, where, I mean, the uniqueness of the bank, right? Like, so when you're going through all these increases, which ones are the most unique to our bank? Like, is it the government risk? Is it the disaster funding?
I would say the capital adequacy is unique. I would say the
Because
mission
I know what
risk-
some of my friends down the hall are going to say.
Yeah.
They're going to say 8 is sufficient.
Fair. I would tell you that the uniqueness is going to be the capital adequacy buffer. I think certainly asset growth risk is unique. Mission risk, governmental risk, correspondent. So if I had to say the two that aren't unique, or really the one is the ERM risk, I would say the rest of the six subjectives are fairly unique to us. I mean, you don't see First International as an example doing disaster loan funding or, worrying about capital infusions because they
Having to
have
over
access.
bailing out an overspending governor.
Right. Right.
And I would point out back to the 17 of that governmental risk. Yes, we were asked to kick in another 150 million from the capital and dividends. But what people maybe don't connect the dots on is because capital of the bank is so critical and we have to maintain that percentage, when we kick out that kind of additional dividend, we've then got to manage that asset base accordingly to keep that percentage right. We quietly sold close to $2 billion of our securities portfolio in that time frame to shoot liquidity back into the system to maintain that ratio. And we didn't really tell anybody about it. But that's just what we have. So that's very unique. Not many banks out there face that additional one-time big needed dividend due to our captive funding base, where they've got to then shrink their bank, overnight by a couple $2 billion. So we have to stay prepared for that. And so that extra buffer really, it makes me feel a lot more comfortable running the bank, knowing I have some of these unique things that you've got to stay prepared for.
And, it's okay, we can go to, I think the next page is the stress testing. and this, a lot of numbers floating around here, but really what I want to point out is to scenario 3, and there's a red box around it. So we run a lot of scenarios around. You can see the upper line is 12% and the lower band is 10%. So we've set kind of our minimum capital target to be 10%. And right now, as we're presenting it, kind of the upper bounds is 12%. So when we stress test this, we want to know what would have to happen in order for us to fall below 10%. And so if you just go down to scenario 3 and kind of that 27, 29 bucket, ROA, return on assets, is 125. The bank runs around 190 to 2. Okay, so we're shocking that by, call it 75 basis points. Our average assets grow up to 13.6 billion. We're 10.5 billion today. We dividend out 100% of our earnings. At that point in time, it's $340 million. So we're really shocking it. Even at that, we go to 9%. And so it allows us to really get a feel for exactly, what's going to have to occur at one time to push us below that, and being able then to manage, like Don said, as we see those things in the future, we can adjust our capital targets based upon economic conditions or other things.
I would also add, in our strategic visits, the first one we've been talking about is we're in a volatile environment. We have been since COVID. We keep seeing these unprecedented events. The unprecedented 500 basis point rate shock up in 9 months. We haven't seen that before. The global shutdown, the Great Resignation. We just talked this morning that the mid and long-term rates are shocking 100 basis points overnight, and that used to be like unheard of, but they're moving 100 basis points in a week. So we're still in this volatile environment, and anytime we're in a volatile environment, it doesn't hurt us to make sure that we have sufficient capital buffer and whatnot. And when we look forward, we think the environment's going to remain a bit volatile. We want to kind of stay in the middle of the fairway, for lack of a better way. I would finally point you guys to the dividend recommendation, and I would point you to the language down below, and we bolded it because I think it's very critical the first time the capital policies come in, the dividend language. The dividend amounts above shown up there. You can see the 140 potential dividend in the general fund, 60 million potential dividend down, 12.8 million in other potential dividends, total of like 212 million. Those are the maximal calculated amounts that our capital plan here that we just went through after all that testing and everything, they would indicate that would be available to be dividended to the quote unquote ownership of the Bank of North Dakota over the next biennium. What we're saying is these potential amounts per this analysis would maintain sufficient capital levels in our bank where we could accomplish our strategies. We would feel like we're running a safe and sound bank, like we're appropriately mitigating the risk, so on and so forth. They are proposals from us to the Industrial Commission. This is your good decision on the dividend amounts. We've also talked about, the categorization of these dividends. I think it is up for discussion whether the, dividend appropriated to the general fund should remain to the general fund or what should be allocated possibly in negotiation to certain, buckets within state that are a little closely more aligned with the bank's mission. So I think we as the Bank of North Dakota are coming to the Industrial Commission, looking you in the eye and saying, this is the right capital. These are the dividends that we can offer and yet still operate moving forward. We would leave the decision in your guys' hands.
What did we give them last biennium?
140 to the
What did we give them the biennium before? What did we give them the biennium before?
200.
Yeah.
That was the 15 something.
No, and the reason I say that is I think this is a really worthy conversation, both in the buckets and whether you're picking a designated amount. And I will use a little bit of the language I've used with my team from December 15th. There are first day of the legislative session questions, and then there are May 1st questions. And I'm fairly certain whether we designate it or not, this money's already been accounted for from both appropriations committees based on recent history. And so.
I think the question is, maybe we should have a conversation.
Yeah.
And Because there's a lot of those years when they didn't need it and they took it. I'd really like to know what the need is. I'd rather be at a May 1st having that conversation.
Oh, I think
What that need is and versus just let's count on it going out the door.
I think I should probably be a little more clear. I agree with you 100%. I'm not sure if that conversation now is going to be a conversation this group wins. I would rather have the conversation as we are talking about leading up to the next legislative session versus 4 days into the legislative session and moving forward. I would prefer if we're going, I mean, there's always tension here. There's going to be tension here. There's going to continue to be tension here. I would prefer that we put ourselves in the most, I think, realistic positions possible to make sure that our ideas and what we think is the long term. By the way, I also think there's a middle ground in this where it is being deployed and not necessarily being deployed to the or to the general fund. We are the appropriators though. So I think we are better off collaborating with our friends and colleagues, and we are trying to change something drastically after the legislative session to start.
The, looking at this situation, I think we have about a 428 million that's already dedicated to programs, which is mission driven. It'd be nice to see some get targeted more probably in those areas, much to what you're saying. Instead of just parking it in the general fund. There's a lot of good things out there, and anytime the bank has been asked, and we've been asked, we've stepped up and tried to address those needs and concerns. I understand, yeah, they've started already, and maybe they've already budgeted into that. It'd be nice to have the conversation and see, can we direct this more towards mission than just parking it in the general fund where we have a good deal of money. But that's my thought.
I don't know if you've had a chance to talk to him. I mean, I'm sure that your assumption on that, Governor, is right, that they're expecting that amount, or that they're folks, they're budgeting for that already. But I wonder if they wouldn't be open to that discussion about, and get now or in the future, it's gonna have to happen at some point. Doesn't have to happen, it should.
I don't disagree. I could tell you that, I could tell you one person who's budgeted for it.
I was gonna say,
Since we're
maybe-
continuing moving forward, so, and dealing
Can we have
with.
his initials?
You can use your right arm and tap him on the shoulder. So,
I was thinking,
as we're moving.
that was my
forward,
next question, but I don't want to, I know you.
Not too hard. So, we're giving our budget address next Wednesday. So,
Yeah.
But I mean that, and I think there's two different sides to this. There's three different sides. There's one, protecting the bank and the autonomy from anything additional from this. We're dealing with a small number, but it's a significant thing as they get through the session and they decide that there are certain things that, potentially need funding. And then we've got to come back and figure out how to make sure that it doesn't cause stress for a particular issue or a particular project or a particular regulator. We're looking at it, I think, from whether we do this now or in the future, but I think we also have to put ourselves in the best position to defend the bank from anything that comes up. You guys have all been around here. At the end of the day, something needs to get done and there's a deal done and it's day 79 of an 81st legislative session. And by the time everybody leaves, you're like, okay, well, how are we going to pay for that? And I think those are important conversations on the back end of this too, as well.
Well, and that's what the bank's been. They've constantly been there to backfill any of those wants, expectations. And we've seen it go up dramatically over the years. I think the thing that was so discouraging is when there was some games being played a couple of years ago, or 4 years ago, then there was $2 billion sitting there and we're making a huge infusion. And then still being asked to step up and do the things that really drive our economies locally and help those industries that we really felt compelled to help. And we did it, but it makes it tough when we don't have as much capital as we could have. We could do more. And that could help us with our mission going forward. But I get what you're saying. But I don't know when we start this conversation. I guess we started it now. And you're right, it's at the beginning of the session. But at some point, we got to have a really heart to heart about how do we put the bank in a better position to keep doing what it's doing.
Oh, I don't disagree. I mean, I don't disagree with that, but I also think when you do the amount for biennium over biennium over biennium, and I mean, when it's baked in, I mean, we teach people how to treat us too. And I think if you want to unbake the cake, you are going to have a lot better scenario and a lot better luck if you're doing it in a plan where you're having collaboration with the people, because eventually they'll make the final decision on whether they're going to spend it or not. And I'd rather not have the fight. I'd rather have a conversation. Because again, I think some of it's not all or nothing either. Some of it's, why are we doing, if we're going to utilize this money, there are 1,000 things that the state of North Dakota spends money on that more closely align with the banks, that you could focus that money and do how you do it versus a general fund, just cash infusion. But I think we will be in a better place to have better success if we're doing it with them and not pulling the rug out from under them. And that might not be an accurate depiction of what it is, but if it's $140 million that they are anticipating coming in, and we're just going to say today we're not doing it, that's what the perception will be.
Well, like you mentioned before, though, it doesn't have to be all or none. I mean, the bank has its role as I see it, and we've got the mission-driven work, and there's a component, but it's not a separate entity. It's not a separate sovereign of some kind that we say, well, none of us sees that. So, but if we started that conversation before that person's initials started doing his budgeting, maybe.
No, I mean, yeah.
No, but maybe there's a middle ground on that too. Even if we just start the conversation now, it strikes me as more productive than waiting till the end of the session, because then they're all going to go back to their lives, and then we'll be back in 2 years with the same exact presumption again.
Yeah.
But I have no personal sense of what is the exact what's the tension point there. But it is somewhere between, we're not a separate sovereign entity and the bank. And then the other side of it, which is just the bank is an ATM, and the state can just go there and say, oh gosh, this is perfect. We're going to throw around legislation with another 10 million, credit here. I'm going to get a bunch of money there. I just don't know I don't know what that sweet spot is. I imagine it changes all the time.
Well, and we've been having this conversation for the last couple of years.
Yeah,
So they're aware
talked
of
about
it.
it.
They're
Yeah.
very aware that
That's true.
we were coming in probably looking at something different. I know you might not have been governor, but
I was in DC.
yeah, you were in DC fighting.
We
another
just print
fight.
new money there.
Well, let's start that.
Let's not.
If I may add, it may help kind of give your point looking forward. I mean, right now, our policy is saying we're good and we have this not for a dividend. But as we strategically plan moving forward, there are a lot of things changing. Banking, fintech's one of them, and we are exploring those fintech avenues and what that may. It is likely that at some point in the future, we would come to HIC on an annual basis and say, based on the strategies and or the combination of that and the growth we expect, and we're in a high growth phase and all that, the plan may say, we don't have room for a dividend this year. I could see that occurring. And I could see that then being a basis of, it then is at least a basis you start from that says, well, based on what's going on at the bank, as tangible and based on the environment, then, the recommended dividend is 0 or it's a smaller amount, or maybe it's a larger amount. That's the dynamic piece of it that I think will help this conversation, not just now, but going forward.
What's a realistic horizon on something like that, Don? Then you look at Fed and say, oh, you'd see that scenario that you just articulated. How far in advance?
You see where you're like, man, I don't see us being able to come up with that dividend, that 140 or whatever they.
I think well in advance. Yeah. If we're doing it right, I mean, we're strategic planning now and we're bringing in the concept of strategic planning doesn't happen once a year. It's daily for executive management. We're embracing that concept and we're, the ideal is you plan for 3 or 5 years down the road, you get that vision, but then you back into it. And we'll be looking at this capital level and the ERM on a monthly and quarterly basis. Any material change we would bring to IC. We wouldn't wait for the end of the year.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to convey, we'd be done right, we would be well ahead of that conversation.
Yeah, that's one for the reason the governor points out too. The earlier the better. That's why I see that coming around the corner.
I think
That they're coming well in advance.
to piggyback off of Don, we're kind of here today because it's all the capital policy, everything's new. Our goal would be, is to come in the early fall next year, because we got to bring the buffers and stress testing every year. Every other year we'd come in early fall with everything, including what we would see as potential dividends or whatever that level would be, but to give plenty of time. Unfortunately, because this is new and some of the things are just working through the process, it's just the timing wasn't perfect.
So there's two things here that we have to consider. One is what does the bank want to do, which is only 30% of the whole conversation. 70% of the conversation is, does the state need it? Because whether the bank's hurting or not, or what kind of position they're in, if the state needs it, they need it. And that's how we've dealt with it in the past, as long as I've been here. Not the last 6 years, 7 years, 8 years, but prior to that, when we've needed it, the state has had to ask the bank to step up. So it still comes down to, does the state need it? They probably do for some budgeting, and I think to the governor's point, there's some budgets been put together that it shows they probably need it right now. But at some point, I think continuing to have the conversation with appropriators and legislators, we got to have a strong bank so we can continue to fulfill our mission. Because everything we do out there in every community helps them, and it helps the state. So I get it. If it's a needs-based request, it's a whole lot easier to stomach than just making an infusion into the general fund. And it sounds like it might be a needs-based request. So
But I think, go ahead. Sorry.
I was just gonna make a motion unless you have something more you want to say. Don't talk me out of my motion.
I'm not talking you out of your motion.
Well, I guess I would move that the Industrial Commission approve the bank's capital policy to ensure a safe and soundness for the bank, and ensure that the bank can meet its mission and objectives. It's in full compliance with the regulatory requirements, industry standards, and that such a policy will require an annual review by an approval of the Industrial Commission of the bank's capital plan going forward. Capital buffers, stress tests, recommended dividends, the capital dividends that will be determined upon the previous ending 2 calendar years. Income prior to the start of the new biennium. Therefore, the Industrial Commission approves the recommended dividend for the 2025-27 biennium up to $212,800,000. And that's broken down in $140 million that would potentially go into the general fund, $60 million for PACE buy-down programs, and $12.8 million for other programs such as APUC and what's SBDC again?
Small business.
Small business development, skilled workforce, and dual credit.
Second motion.
Any discussion?
Commissioner,
Yes.
Attorney General.
Yes.
Governor.
Yes.
Just for clarification on that motion, the last part of that, communicating capital policy and recommended dividend will be provided to legislative leaders.
I mean, I think it's to let them know, particularly long-term, that we need to have a conversation about, is this, you guys anticipate this just being automatic every 2 years, whether you need it or not, and maybe have a little bit of a level reset on that. 2, if you are going to do this, should we talk about the programs that are currently being funded that more closely align with the bank? And 3, which I also think is important, if you are considering any legislation in the next 81 days that is going to be significant or impactful to the bank in any meaningful way, we would encourage some discussion with your fellow elected officials. And I showed this to Attorney General Wrigley. I think this is appropriate to send to legislative leadership. And I would think it's the right approach if all 3 of us would be willing to sign.
I think the simplest analogy I can give is if we're running a dairy operation and we're short on feed, we're not going to produce a lot of milk. So sometimes you need to let us keep a little bit of those funds to buy some more feed so we can produce more milk, which feeds more people, and make sure that we have a healthy community.
Exact analogy I was just thinking. They took the words right out of my mouth.
I figured so.
We don't need a
This
formal-
guy is so well-rounded, I just.
I'm assuming we don't need a formal motion for this. If all 3 of us agree to sign it and send it, we'll agree to sign it and send it.
Yes,
Yeah.
that was part of the original
Part of the
motion,
motion,
and
yeah.
we do have a letter drafted.
Perfect.
I would like to add to that too. I agree with the governor's comments in the tenor of this discussion, and then we add in that component of them, the leadership sitting down and going through some of the stuff at the bank too, to note that we're not getting grabby about it. We're just recognizing there's mission-driven work to be done, and then all the other components of it. I think they view that conversation as very useful to not, and they've maybe heard it before. They have heard it before, I'm sure, but like all of us, we need to be reminded.
I'm just thinking the digital space is coming. I mean,
Yeah.
whether we choose to participate in that or you all put a business plan together that makes sense. I think, that in and of itself, we just put somebody in FSA as or in FinCERT to deal with financial or in crypto and digital currency. And I think it's the common, obviously they're trying to pass legislation in DC, and it is a part of what is going to be banking moving forward. And I don't know how volatile it is or not. I know very little about it. So, but which means others will know, others will want to be informed too. So I appreciate it. I got it on my agenda. Oh, I got it. And Jordan, you're going to give us a presentation on the
Thanks.
North Dakota transmission.
Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thanks.
Good to see you. Got some?
Put the slides up there.
Yeah, Commissioners, thank you. So the purpose for this agenda item is that I'll be presenting, in behalf of Claire Vigasano, the Executive Director of the Transmission Authority. I'll be presenting tomorrow a joint committees.
No, second.
Second.
Oh, it's just my first meeting. I
Yeah.
thought we were doing it together.
Yeah, almost. So tomorrow is the joint meeting of the Energy and Natural Resources Committees between the House and the Senate. And so there's the annual grid resilience plan is hot off the press, and Claire's plan is to present that to you in February. But then with the beginning of the legislative session and me presenting on his behalf, we felt it was appropriate to give a few minutes at least to present to you just some highlights and get some feedback from you, open it up to you at the beginning of the session. With, of course, you gentlemen are the Transmission Authority with Claire as your Executive Director. So just some highlights. Well, yeah.
We do have it.
Yep, we do.
So
So if we can't see it on the screen.
you have the grid resilience study, that's an annual report that's required. And also we'll touch briefly on a couple of important studies that the transmission authority promulgated relating to EPA, potentially harmful EPA proposed rules that some of you, all of you, I'm sure are very familiar with, some more than others.
Redundancy.
Yeah. Yeah, so I put some basic terminology in there when it comes to generation and transmission. I mean, you have the 3 Rs. Resource adequacy is more of the public policy, the regulatory side. What's available based on what the public policy is. Operational reliability is more of the day-to-day management of like the RTOs and managing peak loads and things. Is there based on the resource adequacy of reliability. And then grid resilience is more about the high impact, the more rare high impact events, bad weather, cyber attacks, how well can the grid, how well can the system react to those, absorb that, prepare for it, how well is it prepared, and then how well can you rebound from those things. So the plan, the annual plan is, the report is specific to grid resilience, but all these things are interrelated. So just to specify a few of those terms there. And so you see some of the risks and threats. I mean, no surprises to anybody what those are. Whether it's nature or human caused, or just aging infrastructure. And then as far as the recommendations of the report, it's again really nothing too earth shattering. It's nothing that utilities and RTOs aren't already doing really. It's just that, like Claire described it to me, as this report is a good reminder. Provides important updates, but it helps maybe put pressure on to just to push the conversation further along on certain things. And so the slide on utilities actions, you see what utilities are at the local level, if you will, in North Dakota are already doing. Like supply chain management, for example, the one recommendation in the report was to create kind of a state hub, if you were, state-run centralized hub for material, for inventory, for supply chain management. And that's not necessary. We don't want to go down that road. The utilities already do that with each other. They're good neighbors to each other. That's one example. They do resilience assessments. And when it comes to cybersecurity, they're already held to NERC and FERC standards. As far as aging infrastructure in the state, we're at a pretty good spot, really. It's only largely it's the central rural areas in the state that have some concerns. The western and eastern sides of the state have had so much growth the last couple decades that there isn't the aging infrastructure issue like there is in the central rural areas. And then, so that's so the highlights of that plan, the annual report on grid resilience. And so it's a Claire will report more in depth on that in February, but any questions or on that first before I touch on some other things?
Well, so I know it did bring up maps in here, the mercury and
Yeah, I'll
air
touch on
toxin
that.
standards. You might get some questions from legislators about the lawsuit regulations, what's happening there. So I don't know if you're prepared or if there'll be one of the attorneys in the room.
Yeah, what time are you testifying?
See you 1 p.m. tomorrow.
1 p.m. tomorrow. We should line up a little time for you to talk to Phil Axe.
Yeah.
Oh, no, never mind. Phil Axe is out of the country. You can come by and talk with us tomorrow morning or something. We've got some materials that might be helpful to you. If you get some of those questions, I'll round that up.
Yeah.
You're likely going to get asked that.
Mhm.
We're having to comply, but where
Yeah.
are we at with some of these things? Because I think it's important. And there might be some other things that they're going to ask with respect to coal-fired electric generation, and it may go beyond those because we go back to our base load in that discussion.
So yeah, the two other studies that the Transmission Authority completed last year relating to the mercury and air toxic standards rule and the greenhouse gas regulation. Those showed that MISO wouldn't be able to meet peak demand by 2029, and the other one was SPP. MISO wouldn't be able to meet peak demand in 2028 and SPP in 2030. So I guess that's another way of saying that rolling blackouts would become potentially a common thing, and so that's quite startling, right? 3 to 5 years, and so obviously the lawsuits, the pushback, and the dark clouds on the horizon. You see some little sunshine now, perhaps for a while with a new administration, but those are concerning things.
Well, we're not trying to present a lot of drama. We're just presenting the facts. So I think it'd be good. You get a chance to.
Yeah. Let's talk afterward and discuss. Maybe we get together, a group together tomorrow morning. I'll talk to a couple people at Natural Resource or whatever, just to anticipate some of the obvious questions. And if there gets to be any difficulty in the hearing, I don't mean difficulty because they're being difficult, but something comes up, we would be happy to schedule Phil to go in and have a full on session with them to go through litigation going on, and might be useful for people.
There is a not unfounded belief that the biggest threat to grid resiliency is the federal government.
Yeah, that's no question. And we've had presentations here where literally I think I'm listening thinking, they hear that wrong. I mean, it's not even possible. It's about predictability. We know it's coming and frightening. But it doesn't all go away. We've had this conversation before, Governor. It doesn't go away at noon on January 20th, for sure. There's going to be political assaults on these same things.
But I also think we have a unique opportunity to do what we can and push back with people in an administration that quite frankly want us to keep the lights on.
Yeah.
I added a couple of charts in there on the forecast. Right at the exact time that the EPA is trying to shut down base load or shut down exactly what we need. We have record, exponential growth forecasts. Data centers is up on the top of the list as far as reasons why. Other manufacturing and industrial expansion, but you see how that's been updated. It's pretty remarkable to see the numbers there. How the exponential growth that's forecasted right at the time so we need baseload power the most. We need to keep what we have, and we need to go more. So that's the short stories. Yeah, no glaring issues in North Dakota per se. Great job by local utilities for the most part on what's reported, and potentially disastrous. Strong acceleration and demand keep growing.
I think FERC, about 1.5 years, 2 years ago, I remember that, they released a report where they actually told Washington, slow down. You can't put all this base load power and you can't take it offline. And that was a bipartisan thing. So, you even had the other side saying, you can't do this. You'll devastate our states, our communities, and our industries. So if you got that, I think it's somewhere in the file because we had it in the previous presentation. By the way, is Claire all right, or is he just gone, or is he not?
There's more than all right. He's down in Florida,
Oh,
sitting under a palm tree.
okay. I
Yeah,
guess
it's
we'll
31
excuse it.
degrees here, so it's not that great down in Florida.
In my office.
He's
it's funny.
he's in his office, but it's, in Florida.
He is online, so you can give him.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Thanks, Claire.
I'd be happy to visit more, learn more about specifics of lawsuits.
Yeah, I think it just might be useful. And whether if it were to come up tomorrow in any detail, I think we just go ahead and schedule getting Phil in that group. He'd be glad to do it. He'll be back in a couple of days, so That'd
Exactly.
be great, be useful. That'd be useful.
All right.
And if there's any other specific recommendations or feedback that you have for me or for Claire when he's back, I just wanted to get that in your minds.
I would just mention related to the MATS issue on greenhouse gas cases or rules. The funding that is in the Industrial Commission Admin Office budget of $3 million, about $2.5 million of that has been spent.
Yeah.
And we do expect that the rest of that will run down in the next few months. So part of your presentation will have that information too.
And we have that in our budget request.
We do
Yes.
have an optional request for an additional $3 million.
Yeah, this isn't going away, and like
No.
you said, January 20th, it doesn't matter. We still have these battles we're gonna have to fight. So that's good.
Yeah, there are various pools around here in the Industrial Commission. We've got some that's in our budget request going forward. The legislature's been very supportive, obviously, and they've had a lot of urging from industry, our friends at LEC and elsewhere, and I know Commissioner others and the IC over the years have been. And we've had just one expression of support out of individual legislators along the last many months as this has come up after the other.
Yeah.
We've
And I-
been responsible in addressing these from different approaches and trying to do what we can to help the state. So whether it's in the governor's budget, your budget, IC, or
Yeah,
mine.
that's right. You see, well, and we're accountable for every dollar, obviously. What doesn't get spent, you just seek to move over it. It's the greatest problem in the world if we don't have to spend it. So we really only had criticism one time. It came in here. I meant referenced it yesterday in an article that appeared in the Fargo Forum. We had criticism at one hearing. And when the reporter called me about it, I laughed and said, "I'll bet you my salary." They didn't mention any of the individual cases that we're litigating. And the reporter laughed. She said, "What do you mean you'll bet your salary?" I said, "I wasn't at the hearing, but I'll just bet you." But they didn't mention any of them because they're all so obviously critical to North Dakota. She confirmed that they did not mention that. And then 2 hours later, the people that were complaining called my office to ask us, "What are you guys litigating by the way? Can we see the list?" How weird. 2 hours after you're complaining in public about the fact you're doing it. There's not real, I'm bringing that up to say there's not real opposition to this in the legislature.
Right.
They're strongly
Right.
with us. Yeah.
No, even outside of presidential change. I mean, you make good Chevron law in an ag case, you've made good Chevron law. It applies here, it applies everywhere else. So we should be aggressive protecting North Dakota's right.
Yep.
Take care of North Dakota business. I mean, there are going to be a lot of different opportunities that exist in those spaces. We should be willing and ready. If we keep winning lawsuits and we got to go ask for the emergency commission for more money, I'd be the happiest guy alive.
That'd be great.
That is one place I will be more than willing to go beg for more money. Thanks, Jordan. Anybody else? Go to the order. I move to adjourn. And we're good. Or do we want to deal with that before or after?
We can deal with that.
Okay. So without objection, this meeting will be adjourned. Thanks, everyone.
All right.